When the Night Comes Out presents, and then silence. People have such a pleasant idea of small towns. There are those who cling to this idea of small town America and wish to bring it back. Small streets lined with stores and diners and happy families holding hands. Such a world never really existed. Behind that image, there was a darkness, something that was evil. It was all great as long as you were the right color, the right makeup, the right kind of people. We've come a long way from that, right? The truth is, there's something creepy about small towns. Eyes that dart to strangers as if they were in imminent danger. A hostility toward change and the values of the rest of the world. A feeling that things are dying, but the faces are smiling as the world collapses behind them. What happens when one young man discovers his life in such a town comes with a horrific price. It was my first night on the job. I had just turned 18, and my dad was all up in my face about having a job for the summer. It was the last thing I wanted to do. You probably remember what it was like when you were that age. You kind of knew you were an adult and starting to get worried about things like responsibility and money and shit, but you also still had part of you that's a kid. The kid who wanted to sleep late and goof around and hang out with his friends. The part which sucked was the job my dad found was a night shift thing. It meant I was asleep all fucking day and then working at night. All the times when my friends would be out. They would be in bed by the time I got off work, and then heading out to their daytime jobs when I was heading into bed. I could just never fucking get used to the sleeping during the day. My room could never get dark enough, and I could never adjust. Don't they say your body releases some fucking chemical only at night, and if you sleep during the day, no matter how dark you make it in the room, you can't get the chemical released? I think I read it somewhere. I live in the middle of fucking nowhere, by the way, in case you were wondering. Hanley, Illinois is somewhere right near the middle of the state, and half the time, if you're like me and think about this shit, you wonder why anyone would have ever put a town here. I mean, there's no river nearby of any consequence, there's no lake, there's not even a railroad track. It's half an hour to the nearest decent highway. There's just farmland, forest, and lots of two-lane roads through them. Hanley is like the land time forgot. Like the movie where the explorers end up on some island that hasn't been touched in a billion years and there are still dinosaurs and shit. Yeah, Hanley's like that, except everything still looks like it's out of the fucking 40s or 50s. The downtown area is thriving, and there's even still a TV repair shop people patronize and doesn't appear to be going out of business anytime soon. When was the last time you saw a TV repair shop? Yeah, I didn't think so. No Walmart, no Kmart, there's no big box store. The nearest mall is probably near Springfield, and that's about 100 miles away. It's all small-town bliss, like something out of the late 40s or 50s. The kind of days Republicans are always longing for, including the racism and misogyny. Plenty of that here, too. There is a general store run by a kindly old man, and all of the teenagers get their first job bagging groceries or making deliveries to the old people. I did it for a while when I was about 15. I rode my bike and had a basket on the front and the whole thing. I also delivered newspapers for a while. There's also a dime store which sells candy and a newspaper stand still selling newspapers and a rack of comic books on the side. And the guy everyone calls Chuck sitting there all day long handing people their papers through the windows of cars. Down the street is a store selling women's clothing, mostly with dresses and fashion mannequins in the window. And next door to it is the men's clothing store with suits and crap in the window there. Hardware store comes next, then the plumbing company, and the real estate office. There's a McDonald's, because there's one of those everywhere, but there is also Dale's Drive-In at the end of the main drag, and people still pull their cars up and drink milkshakes and French fries drenched in grease and shit like that. As I said, the land time forgot. I heard once the Wally World people had shown interest and tried to buy up some land and build one of their stores, but something happened and things did not go through and nothing was built. We were the town that beat the Walmart people, but you'd never know it. It's stuff which never gets covered in the media, fake news and all that. So I had done all the early teenage jobs. They were the kind of jobs you did part of the day and only a few days a week. You made enough money to visit the local movie theater, which was just off the main drag, and it had 5 screens, which was big for this part of the world. They had the latest movies, but sometimes showed old black and white movies. You could hang out at Dale's and eat the milkshakes and malts on Sundays. I even had my first date and got my first kiss at the age of 16 at Dale's. Martha Mullins was her name. We're friends these days. After doing that, my dad said it was time to make some real money, and the night shift at Mueller's Tool and Die here outside of town was the place which paid the most. It was a cush job. Everyone knew it despite the shitty hours. Most of my friends were even kind of jealous. They were up all night getting drunk and high, and I drove around the large industrial complex in a battered pickup truck with security stenciled on the side. I also walked through the creepy plant and made sure there were just rats and mice and no men. Mueller's was a place which made tools that made tools. The guys who worked here had been there for a long, long time. They were muscular and pale from working inside days on end. The machines looked like something out of the 50s too, but they sparkled in the light and worked perfectly. I just walked up and down and turned the keys in the various security stations from this device I carried on my belt and made sure the doors which were supposed to be locked were locked and no one was there. Of course, if someone was there, what the fuck was I going to do? I had a big metal flashlight and that was about it. I also had a battered old cell phone which had a walkie-talkie function providing a direct line to the local police department, which actually did have someone on duty all the time. I also had a very, very old can of mace clipped to my belt. This had been given to me by my boss my first night as if it was going to solve my problems. In fact, I was pretty sure all that would happen if I pressed the button was it would explode in my hand. That was it. I got to walk around wearing my headphones most of the time, but it was also kind of creepy, so I would often just have one earbud in and listen with one ear. I also had a radio in the security office I would use to listen to the only local radio station, which was also on Main Street. It had a heavy metal show piped in via satellite from Hollywood late at night. As for the truck, well, it was old as shit, but kind of fun. There were indeed times I would race up and down the roads between the 3 buildings. I would also attempt to do donuts in the parking lot, but the ancient vehicle would not do them properly. The radio on this one was only AM, the FM having long ago stopped working, but late at night I could pick up stations from around the country, and sometimes baseball games from St. Louis or Chicago. So I was out and about, enjoying the night air, when I first heard the radio broadcast. It was a late June kind of weather. Things in the middle of Illinois are weird weather-wise when it comes to summer. We get hot air from down south, like St. Louis, but also the cooler stuff which comes down from Chicago. So it was the kind of night just made for driving around the parking lot and roads behind the razor-wired fences with the windows open. I had spoken to my friend George Melendez just a few minutes before. George had only been in town with his family for about 6 months. He and I had become pretty good friends pretty fast, although his family had truly experienced the racism inherent in this throwback land time forgot little town. They were, as you might have guessed from their name, a Hispanic family. Really mixed race, but in this town no one gives a fuck about the mixture. If you have darker skin and you have a foreign-sounding name, you might as well have terrorist or job stealer stamped across your forehead. He and I immediately got along. I was a bit of a loner at school, and he was an immediate outcast. He sat next to me at lunch, and we hit it off right away. While he and I shared a love of movies, old and new, comic books, Stephen King novels, and smoking weed, I was also really interested in his sister. Gina was 16, and she was so smoking hot I swear she melted the pavement as she walked by. Even the racist assholes which seemed to dominate the town had to admit she was gorgeous, with her long brown hair, dark eyes flecked with gold, and skin tinted just enough to make her look exotic. Of course, George knew right away I wanted his sis, and he always made fun of me. He often hinted Gina might have had feelings back for me, but I doubted it. I was a total loser with the ladies, and no way was a girl that hot going to be interested in me, even if she was 2 years younger. "Hey dude, how's the big deal job going?" George asked me this particular night. "Hey, Gina's here, and she wants to know if you drive around in the fucking truck without your pants on." "Shut up," I replied, laughing. "Of course I do. I don't carry a nightstick, but my giant cock will do in a pinch. I need it ready for use at a moment's notice." George laughed so hard he burst into a fit of coughing. He was probably a little bit high. I would have been had I not been working. Even saying this, though, what I did like to do was park the truck at the far corner of the parking lot, near the fence and a big open field which was bordered by the woods on all sides. Sometimes I smoked a cigarette and sometimes a joint. I had plans on smoking something that night. "How's the job, seriously?" he asked. "Boring as shit, like everything in this town? What are you up to?" "Not much, watching some old ghost movie thing on the Roku," he said, referring to the streaming device on his TV. They had all these channels made specifically for Roku, including one which showed nothing but old horror movies. We loved it. "It's pretty fucking bad, but it always makes things a little more interesting, right?" "Fucking A. I wish I was there." "You get time off this weekend, right? Well, you can come over Saturday afternoon maybe. We can check it out then. Go all MST3K on the motherfucker?" "Sounds good. Hey, it's a gorgeous night. Lots of stars out. Gonna head to the fence and relax." "I bet. Well, don't fall asleep and get fired or something stupid. We'll catch up tomorrow." I hung up the phone and pointed the front of the truck to the fence. Overhead, the sky was like black velvet and dotted with bright stars and planets. When I looked closely, I could see smaller twinkling and sparkling lights roaming across the sky slowly. Planes? Satellites? UFOs? Who fucking knew? The drive was short. I shut off the engine, but turned on the battery so I could tune in the shitty AM radio. It was pretty late, but that was sometimes when things got particularly interesting on the AM dial. I kind of remembered from a class I took on radio. FM waves are stronger and go right through stuff like tunnels and shit. However, they are more line of sight, which is why you can only get them so far when you head away from the transmitter. AM waves are different and downright weird. Their waves follow the curvature of the earth and even bounce off of the fucking sky or some shit. Anyway, at night, the smaller AM stations shut down to make room for the big 50,000-watt motherfuckers, and you could get stations from all over the country. KMOX out of St. Louis was the easiest, but you also got news stations out of Chicago and WGN. You got stuff from Kansas City and all over. Sometimes you just picked up really weird stuff. Religious crap which bordered on the terrifying. All kinds of languages. Shortwave got even weirder, but AM was always good in a pinch. I sat back and decided it was time to unwrap the sandwich I had tucked into the passenger seat when I got into work. PB&J, gotta love it. Some potato chips and a warm Coca-Cola. The late-night lunch of champions and kids trying to make a buck. I also had a cigarette. Yeah, I know, filthy habit, but fuck you. I tuned into KMOX for a while. It was back to new stuff, and I got updated on what the asshole in the White House was doing and the other assholes around the world as I ate the sandwich. Once it was done, I started tuning the knob. I wanted to find something else to listen to before I got grease from the chips all over my fingers and then all over the radio. The daytime guy was a real asswipe and he'd bitch about it. So I cracked open the Coke and drank a huge gulp of the warm fizz and began to tune the knob. There wasn't a lot. I heard the other news station out of Chicago. The overnight guy on WGN was fun to listen to, but he was railing against the Dark Knight movie again, and that kind of fuckery needs to be ignored, so I did. Spanish stations, something which sounded like Polish or Russian, religion. Some orchestral thing that was actually pretty gorgeous to listen to for a while, but I was hoping for something which wouldn't put me to sleep. It would suck to be caught out here sound asleep at the fence in the truck with classical music blasting away and PB&J crumbs on my chest. I had just about reached the far end, way over to the right, getting about to 1590 or 1600. Then the static broke apart.
We didn't do anything to you!
I froze. I sat up straight in my seat. It was a woman. However, the sound of terror and fear in her voice was palpable. She was terrified in a way I had never heard before on the radio. I had heard radio plays and stuff like that before, but this was not one of those. If she was acting, she was fucking brilliant. My ears heard the sound, but it was so quick and there was so much static, my fingers were still turning the knob. I was now listening to some English dude talking about shit in the UK. Fuck, I said, and began turning slowly back to the left. Static, static.
They were just children. What did you do to them? Why are you doing this?
More static. There were other voices there, deep, buried in the background. I couldn't make out a sound. Then there was just weeping and hysterical crying. It was the same woman, still terrified, pleading. More words from her, but I couldn't make them out. I adjusted the knob, and suddenly there was the sound of a man reading the news, and I turned back, and the sound of the woman crying in fear came back. I reached for my phone. I had to get this down. I had to prove this was happening. Was this a radio drama or something? Was it a pirate radio station? Christ, did they have snuff radio? I found the record app and hit the button and pressed it against the speaker.
No, both of them were kids. What did you people do?
More words in the background. Something which almost sounded like chanting. Then, deep in the background, as I leaned in with my ears right near the speakers in the dash, I heard something else. Something moving. A deep, guttural noise.
Oh God, please. What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do?
More crying and weeping. More sounds of people in the background saying things which did not sound human. There was the other noise again. Something alive there. Growling, perhaps? What was this? I felt chills running up and down my spine, and fear was like a fist of ice in my gut.
Go away! Let me go, please!
More static now, and I reached out with trembling fingers and tried to just nudge the knob and tune it in better. Once again, I got the other news station from who knew where, and then turned it back the other way. More of the weeping and crying. She was really crying now, as if something truly horrible was happening.
We've never done anything to you people. Why are you doing this, please?
This time there was a loud noise I could not describe. I have heard bears growl and lions roar at the zoo, and something in the sound reminded me of those. Something animal, primitive, yet at the same time, ancient. Then more voices. The sound of the woman saying things and crying, pleading for her life, but the words were gone. She was crying hard, and it was difficult to understand her.
We never did anything to you. We never hurt anybody. What are you going to do? No, please, no, we didn't do anything.
Then there was a scream, loud and clear, and it drove out of the speakers right into my ear. It was like a spike into my brain, and I jerked my entire body backwards and hit my head against the back of the cab. I saw stars and let out a stream of curses. The scream was clear and went on for what seemed like forever. And then, silence. Just static. Jesus, I said. There was ice-cold sweat on my hands and down my back and across my neck. I reached out to my forehead and wiped my fingers across my brow. I looked down at my phone, which was now on the passenger seat next to me, still recording. I hit the stop button. My hands were still shaking. I hit the button on the file we had saved.
No, both of them were kids. What are you...
I stopped it. Then I found the can of Coke and downed the rest of it. I let out a belch and looked out the window. The darkness seemed to press harder to the windows than ever before, and it was like something alive. Normally, I liked the darkness and enjoyed this time of night, but now the field beyond seemed like it teemed with evil and things which were alive and headed for me, zombies or something. I had to play this for George. Jesus. I started the engine and headed back toward the building. I would spend the rest of the fucking night in the security office and look at things through the cameras. Fuck this. It was about 8 in the morning when I knocked on George's door. I knew he had the day off from working at the hardware store downtown today. He didn't really need the job. His dad was loaded, but he said it paid off to be in touch with the people. I had no idea what it meant, but it was his deal and not mine. Regardless, I knew he'd be asleep, but pounded on the door anyway. George's mother answered, and the look of surprise confirmed for me I was not expected, and it was way too early. Both of those things were something I had predicted, but she was definitely the type who wore her expressions right on her face. Gina was the same way, and you could tell by looking at the mother how the daughter got her looks. "Hi, Mrs. Melendez, sorry for showing up here so late," I said, pushing past her into the house before she could tell me no. "Is George here? Is he awake?" I was already bolting up the stairs as she was stammering around the coffee mug she held in her hand. "I think he's asleep," she called up after me. "Hey, wait a minute." "I'll just wake him up. Thanks, Mrs. Melendez," I called back down. I was around the corner and down the hall seconds later. I am sure I left her baffled and stunned and probably shaking her head. I pushed open George's door and into his darkened room. He had thick black curtains over the window, but sunlight pushed around the edges. George was snoring away and buried beneath a mountain of blankets. I stomped into the room and kicked the mound on the bed. "George, it's me," I said. "I have to show you something." George's snoring hitched and then he sputtered. He mumbled something, and I kicked the mound of blanket 2 more times. All right, Christ, stop fucking kicking me," he said, and finally sat up, his hair a mess and a crease along one side of his face. "What the fuck are you doing here so goddamn early in the morning on my day off, asshole?" "Shut up for a minute and listen to this fucked up thing I heard listening to the radio right after I talked to you." "Are you kidding me? Waking me up to play some fucking religious broadcast or some shit? Just listen, douchebag." I played the clip. George's eyes were closed at first, and there was a look of pure irritation on his face. Then, as the clip went on, his face smoothed out. By the time it ended, his eyes were open and his brow furrowed. He asked me to play it again when it was done, so I did. He sat forward and listened hard. Then he pulled some headphones out of a drawer and listened to it again on those. His eyes got very big, and he told me to listen through the phones. It was like hearing it for the first time all over again. The crying and pleading was even more clear, and the weird menacing animalistic sounds in the background were easier to hear. You can still hear the other voices, but not make out what they said. They did not sound pleasant. They did not sound like they were trying to help the pleading woman. The silence at the end was deafening. "Well?" I asked. "I think that is very fucked up," George said. "But what do you think it is?" "I don't know." "I think it has to be a prank or something," he said. "Maybe some kind of radio drama you picked up from outer fucking Mongolia or some shit." "I don't think so." The voice came from his bedroom doorway and scared the shit out of both of us. My fear soon turned to an amazing hard-on as Gina appeared there. She was still dressed in shorts and a shirt showing way more skin than was necessary, obviously still in her pajamas. I immediately flushed red, began to stammer, and started to sweat in a way which was totally unhealthy. "What are you doing listening in?" George asked. "Just listening. What the fuck is my answer supposed to be to such a stupid-ass question? What kind of dumbass leaves the door open?" George glared at me. "What do you mean?" I asked, ignoring the look and focusing on her. Why do you think it's not some other radio station? I get a lot of shit from around the country at night. Gina stepped into the room, and I couldn't help but stare at her legs as she did. When I turned my head, I saw George had caught my glance, and there was a smirk on his face. I mouthed to him to shut up. "Let me listen," she said, and grabbed the headphones and phone. She was listening before George or I could react. "Yeah, this is local. You can tell from the quality of the sound. Low-powered, though, probably overmodulated." I had no idea what she was talking about, but I nodded. "Yeah, I thought it was local." "Fuck you, you had no clue," George said. "If she told you it was from Mars, you'd agree. I don't know what it all means, but if this is local, then it's a joke. Or some kind of dickhead fucking with a pirate radio station or something." Gina nodded. "Could be, but we could find out." "How?" George and I asked in unison. Gina rolled her eyes like we were the dumbest people on the planet. She grabbed George's laptop and had it open seconds later. Before long, she was typing away, and after a few more minutes, she flipped it back around. It took me a moment to realize she had called up a satellite image of Mueller's tool and die. "Okay, so that's cool, but what good does it do?" George asked. I was too tongue-tied to say anything, like I always was when Gina was around. "Hey, asshole, let's see what we can find around the place where he works," she said. "If we find something weird, we can maybe figure out where the signal's coming from." She had a point. The three of us hunched over the computer. George took the controls and began to slowly pan the image around. We zoomed in a bit tighter, and the image distorted and changed, pixelating, and then forming into a solid image again. Lots and lots of trees for a long time. Then, out of nowhere, there was what appeared to be a dirt or gravel road running through the trees. George slowed down, and then, off to the right, there was a sudden clearing. "What the hell is that?" I asked, but I already knew. The picture was disorienting at first, but now it was clear. "Looks like a drive-in," George said. "Of course," I replied. "The old drive-in is out there. The place has been abandoned since the late 70s, I think. It would be the perfect place to set up a pirate radio station or something." "Something about it looks funny," Gina said, more to herself than to the rest of us. Before I could ask what she meant, she had opened a new tab and typed away. A moment later, she found a street view. I wondered about the driver of the Google Street View car, which had decided to go down such an old and run-down road. The image showed the entrance to the drive-in, the name on the sign out front so old and faded it could no longer be read. I knew it said Starlight Drive-In, however, from all of the times my parents used to talk about spending the night at the Starlight. Twisting the image around, the entrance was overgrown, and the screen, which could be seen from the road, was broken and run down and dirty. It looked abandoned. The area which had the concession stand and the projects was falling apart. Part of the roof collapsed, with a goddamn tree growing right through the roof. "Looks run down to me," I said, but something was nagging me now as I looked at it. "Yeah, but look at the satellite image again," she said, and flipped back over to the other tab. I looked close, and the penny dropped. The left side of the screen showed the obviously run-down Screen 1. You could even tell from space it was old and run down, overgrown with weeds and shrubbery. Except if you looked close, even from 100 miles in the sky, you could see a small path leading from the front of the place around to the other side, where Screen 2 sat back-to-back with the first screen. It was obvious the area in front of Screen 2 was mown, and it looked like fresh pavement or gravel was down there. It was hard to tell from the overhead image, but I was pretty sure the screen there was white, clean, and intact, and the shed from the concessions and projector on this side was in perfect condition. "Holy shit," George said. "Yeah, the other screen looks like it's in perfect working order," Gina said. "Does it seem like the kind of thing a bunch of teenage pranksters doing pirate radio would do?" I asked. George shook his head. "No. What the fuck is going on here?" "I have no idea, but it's weird. I mean, we don't even know for sure the thing I heard on the radio is tied to this. We're just guessing." "I think it's a pretty safe bet," Gina said, but then she snapped the laptop closed. There is one way to find out. I cocked my head at her, and George gave her a sideways glance. We go out there, she said. George sat up straighter. What do you mean we? There is no fucking way you're going out there. Shit, we shouldn't even go out there. Why not? Gina protested, a hint of a smile on her face. Scared? Did you hear the fucking thing he recorded? You bet your ass I'm scared. Don't be a pussy all your life, George, Gina said. And if you try to make me stay home, I'll just tell Mom and Dad and they'll bust you anyway. Come on, get dressed. Let's be out there before the day wears on too much. We want to be back before dark. She got up and bounded out of the room. I could not help but admire her spunk and moxie. There was a shadow of a smile on my face, and when I turned back to George, he had a sneer on his mug. He took one look at me and shook his head. Oh, shut up, he said. It was mid-morning, and we were on our way. I drove. Gina had found an old GPS device in the garage from when her dad got on this hiking kick, which she was able to enter the coordinates of the drive-in and guide us there. I told her my phone would probably work just as well, but she was convinced it was so out of the way it wouldn't, and we might have to run around in the woods. I didn't argue. I didn't want to. It didn't take quite as long as I thought. It was still morning when I turned off the main road and started down the old pitted road that led past the drive-in. The road was filled with potholes, and at this point, little more than gravel. It had been a main road once, years ago, when the movie theater was still in operation. Weeds and shrubbery grew up from cracks in the road. However, at one point, I noticed there were ruts off to the side of the road, as if vehicles had been traveling along the sides to get out here. You see the ruts? George asked. I indicated I did. Someone's been out here. Maybe a lot of people, Gina said, and there was worry in her voice for the first time. For some reason, this sent even more chills down my spine. Are we really going to go in there? I asked, my mouth dry very suddenly. Yes, Gina said. I pulled into the entrance, but a heavy chain was draped across it. It was rusty and old, but there were more tire marks here on the ground and then went past the chain too. The lock was also newer than the chain. Without a key, I parked the car and we got out. It was very quiet. As the assholes in movies like to say, too quiet. Guess we walk, I said, playing the Captain Obvious role. No one else replied. We stepped over the chain and through the parking lot area. We walked past the concession stand and the project or booth area. The tree was even bigger than the photo online. The photo was probably a few years old, and we had had a lot of rain around here over the years. The posts at one time holding the speakers were all gone. A few of them still stood, but they were also rusted and bent. None of those had speakers anymore. The rolling hills where the cars would line up had collapsed, and there were so many potholes. More bushes and trees grew in the area in front of the battered and hole-filled Screen 1. How the screen was even still standing, I had no clue. Vines clung to what was left of it. Man, this place seems almost deliberately run down, George said, his head swiveling left to right and back again. He was right. There was a way of looking at the chaos and rot that made it seem deliberate. The hedge was cocked to the side almost perfectly a certain way. The vine across the screen at one corner was draped more like Christmas garland than if it were growing naturally. The potholes almost formed a kind of pattern if you looked long enough. I got more chills. Who would do that? I asked. We walked in silence. Around us, insects buzzed. The cicadas which come out every summer, even though they are only supposed to come out every 17 years. As if some of them get their clocks all fucked up when buried in the ground and come out every summer. I felt a bit like them at the moment, like I had just come out of a hole and I was looking around for the first time in years, seeing things new, maybe for the first time. There were no birds around the drive-in, though. Nothing. Not a single living thing. Not even ants on the ground scurrying around. We walked across the vast expanse of the lot for the first screen. We suddenly didn't feel like talking. Gina looked around and chewed on her lower lip. George was wringing both hands together. We rounded the corner and came around the rundown screen to the other screen on the other side. Jesus Christ, George said. It was night and day. The area was paved. There was no vegetation growing up out of the ground here. The screen was bright and white and almost blinding in the sunlight. There were no speakers here either, but then I already knew that, right? Because for some unknown fucking reason, they broadcast the audio of whatever they were showing here on a low-powered AM frequency. The cars here just had to tune their radios to the right frequency and then sit back and watch the screen. The building back there is in perfect shape, George said as he pointed. The projector building was indeed in perfect working order. No holes, no trees through the roof. The concession stand looked dark and abandoned, but not run down. What is this? Gina asked. I mean, did you hear the soundtrack of some weird horror movie or something? What, and kids or some group in town has decided to run a top-secret horror movie club where they meet in the middle of the night here and watch films? They somehow, and for some unknown reason, have made one side of this drive-in look like shit and kept up the other side in perfect working order? Why? What about this makes sense? Gina studied the ground for a bit and then looked at me. She looked scared. Then what? I shrugged. Let's check out the building, George said. There was nothing else to do, so we all agreed. Something hooted or screeched in the trees nearby, and we all jumped. It was as if, rounding the corner, we had entered some other time or place. Like the entire town itself. Like a place time forgot, but it went back much, much further than the 50s. We entered the building, and it took a moment for our eyes to adjust to the darkness inside. It was also a lot cooler in there than outside. The first thing that hit us all at the same time was the smell. There was a rotten smell, yes, as if things had died in here. Lots of things. Things in the walls, sure, as with any old building surrounded by the woods. But it was something else. A weird, primal, rotten thing. Something tangy, too, like blood. Fresh blood, urine, feces, sweat. And something else. Something like musk. Animalistic. Something humans had long ago lost the words to describe. What the fuck? George said, his voice little more than a breeze, a tiny whisper in the air. The front room was empty, the floor a little dirty. This had been the concession area, the indoor part. There was a counter, and behind it there would have been a popcorn maker, soda machines, and a candy counter. All of it was gone now. Just blackness. There were shoe prints on the floor. These are fresh, Gina said, towing her sneaker against the dirty footprint. This is fresh mud. What the fuck is back here? George asked, and pointed to a doorway and led to a back area. It must have been the storage area during the busy days. We moved in there together, and all of us stopped. Gina gagged. George made a sound like he was about to throw up. I just started breathing through my mouth. The blood on the ground still managed to glisten in whatever dim light came through the chicken-wired window set up high in the wall. There was a chair there too, also covered in blood. What looked like old, spilled paint was spattered across the floor in front of the chair. It was also across the walls, even up on the ceiling. It was black, but I knew it was old, dried blood. Beneath the chair were chunks of something pinkish and white. I didn't want to know what it was, but it looked like pieces of old meat. Across the far wall, which was normally white, were words. They were old and a bit faded, but written in red paint. We protect our town. We make the sacrifice. We secure our future. We keep things safe. We protect our families. We protect our way of life. We make the sacrifice. What the holy fuck does that mean? George said, still talking at a whisper. He licked his lips as if things were dry. The thing my eyes kept going to, despite the blood and the meat and the weird sayings in red, was the spot in the corner across from us. It was dark there, but not just like there was no light. It was as if the area in the corner there ate the light. I could almost see the light being drawn there, into the darkness, like depictions I had seen of black holes in space devouring stars and galaxies. It was as if this shadow, this darkness, were alive. If you turned your head a little bit, it sort of receded into the background, hovering there just out of the corner of your eye. And then when you turned back and looked head-on, there it was. It moved, the edges hard to define and determine. There were sounds, too. Something moving. It sounded like something moving. Slithering. "What is it?" Gina asked. She walked slowly toward the dark space. Her eyes were wide open, and her mouth moved slowly as if she were not thinking about what she was saying or doing. Her feet shuffled across the floor. As she moved, her right hand extended, stretched out in front of her, as if reaching for the edges of the shadow. She trod right through the blood on the floor, nearly stepping on the pieces of meat. I reached out a hand and grabbed her, spun her around. When her eyes didn't clear, I slapped her across the face. The slap made a loud sound, an echo which died fast and weirdly. Again, as if the shadow there had eaten the sound too. Gina blinked, first out of shock and then relief. "What the fuck?" she asked, and she cast an eye back over her shoulder. "Let's get out of here." "What is this?" George just kept whispering. "What is this? What is it?" I could hear it now. I could hear the whispering and slithering sound from the shadow. There was another sound too. Something like growling. The other thing was, it sounded like the sounds were getting louder now. Getting closer. "We need to get out of here, George," I said. There was something happening to my head too. Something like fingers in there. I could feel my will to move, my desire to even take another step away from this place. The smells were gone already. All there was the sound. The sound of something moving and coming from the shadow. "George, let's go." George nodded, but he didn't move much. "Yeah," he said, but his voice was barely audible. "Something's coming. Something wants us to stay." "I know it, buddy, so we have to leave. We have to get out of here. George, come on, now." I grabbed Gina and pulled her away and through the concession area. George followed, but he moved slowly. A moment later, we broke out into the light, and it pierced the back of my skull like a blade. I breathed the fresh air, and the sounds in my head dimmed. I felt like I could breathe again. George burst out a moment later, stumbled and fell to the ground, scraping his hands. "What the fuck was that?" he asked. "What the fuck was that? What the fuck is going on around here?" I turned my head and projectile vomited onto the pavement. Then again. I bent over and let my stomach empty itself until I was sure I was throwing up breakfast I had eaten years ago. I saw little black dots in front of my eyes, kept my head down. Gina was on the ground too, rocking back and forth. "We need to get out of here," I said, spitting. "Get away from here." No one argued with me. We went back to my house, and I collapsed in my bed. George sat down at the desk, and Gina just folded herself to the floor. All of us were way too pale, and Gina had thrown up on the way back. I could still hear the thing in my head, the inhuman whispering in my head. "What was all of that?" I asked. Gina fished out her phone, did some messing around, and then showed me the pictures she had taken. I hadn't even seen her doing it while I was there, but she had a photo of the weird red writing on the wall. "This," she said. "This is what's behind it. What the fuck do you have here, some kind of cult?" George grabbed the phone and studied the words. "This place really is like something out of the fucking 50s, dude. I mean, not even a Walmart. Who's been keeping the outside out of this place? No other town is like this, with the thriving, cute little downtown area and the little neighborhood grocery store instead of some chain. Neither Jewel nor Schnucks is here? This is fucked up. I sat up and looked at them. They were obviously Hispanic, or whatever the term is these days. In fact, they were biracial. George and Gina had a Mexican father and a Caucasian and Mexican multiracial mom. This had not sat well with people when it was found out who was buying the house they now lived in. But then again, it didn't last all that long. Here they were. What makes you think this has anything to do with the way Hanley is? I asked. Look at the shit written here, George replied, and he passed the phone over to me. I mean, the protecting our way of life, securing the future, and all of that shit? Is there some bizarre secret society here? Something like the KKK or something similar? Well, forgive my rudeness here, but you guys are here. The town let you guys move in. Yeah, and the amount of shit my mom and I get when we walk around town here is the size of a mountain, Gina said. You should see the looks we get. I had no idea. I had accepted them right away. I never noticed anything. White fucking privilege or some shit, right? Yeah, me too, George said. Do you think I had this brooding, moody, dark personality back in Chicago? I developed this when my dad told me about some of the letters he was getting before we even moved here. I figured if I made myself as moody and scary as possible, people would just leave me alone. Again, I had no idea. I hadn't seen anything, but I was so used to life in Hanley. An idea occurred to me. You know, about a decade ago, I said. They did want to build a Walmart here. The town protested, but the company had purchased this land. Some guy near the outskirts of town had sold a bunch of his land and planned to retire to Florida. Then suddenly, the guy who owned the land just vanished, and the Walmart thing fell through. I figured the town council had brought legal action against them. It's what I was always told. They told me the guy who owned the land had moved to Florida like he planned. I shrugged. I should check into it, George said. We all should, Gina replied. I've seen documentaries about Walmart and their practices. I have a hard time believing little old Hanley somehow had the legal help to defeat them. They have armies of lawyers and their own politicians. You mean to tell me this little Nowheresville had the wherewithal to challenge them and defeat them? What happened? I felt those chills down my spine. Instinctively, I wanted to defend the town which had been my home my entire life, which was weird. I had, in my own head, been referring to it as the land time forgot. As I got older, the fact nothing much seemed to change around here was weird. We had the internet, we had modern and recent movies, we had modern clothes, and things were in color instead of black and white, but things were very old-fashioned. Mostly white, mostly all Protestant. Everyone knew everyone, and new families like Gina and George's were extremely rare. I tried to think of the last time I had seen a new family move in. I had a vague memory of a family with a little girl moving in somewhere around here, but I couldn't remember their names, and I couldn't remember ever speaking to them. I had been pretty little at the time. Why hadn't the little girl gone to my school? She couldn't have been much younger than I was. Let's head to the library, I said. Why, we can look this stuff up online, Gina said. I'm not sure our little bullshit newspaper is online in any archive, I replied. Some things are pretty old-fashioned around here, including that. I want to find out how this town managed to keep the big box store away. Then I want to find out what it has to do with the building. What we can find out about the fucking drive-in. They did not look enthused, but agreed. We found the library bustling, mostly with little kids and moms looking for ways to keep the little brats entertained. Now I noticed the sideways glances they give Gina and George. Why had I never noticed it before? The sunlight seemed bright, but not quite as bright as it had the other day. I noticed the dirt on the sides of the library. I saw the moss and mold in the corners of the buildings downtown. It was as if blinders had been ripped off, and I saw Hanley was rotting from the inside out. We found the most private computer terminal in the place. It was upstairs, with a window to our backs, behind stacks of reference books. The librarians had seen us enter, but they said hello to me and then went back to their work. The terminals at the Hanley Public Library did access the archives for the Hanley Bugle newspaper, which somehow still ran and had subscriptions and deliveries and had not moved entirely online. Again, something which had never seemed odd until right now. Why had no major newspaper from one of the major media companies not bought it up? How did it not become entirely online? I sat at the terminal and began searching the archives. Sure enough, I found the articles about Walmart coming to town and buying the land at the edge of town. There was an opinion piece from the editor about how they did not like the idea and Walmart was too aggressive and not in keeping with the values of Hanley. Yes, it was a big business and Sam Walton was some kind of personification of the American dream, but Walmart was not right for Hanley. The town was going to fight it tooth and nail. I remember this, I said. Look at the wording, though. Protecting our values, protecting our way of life. It sounds like the shit written on the wall, George said. A little too close, Gina whispered. What happened? I was pretty little at the time. I remember my parents not liking it either and talking about it during dinner. I remember them telling me the town had lawyers and a mayor and councilmen who would stop it. Walmart could move on to some other town and set up their store. I kind of remember there was a big town meeting in City Hall. I didn't go, of course, but I was home with a babysitter and my parents went. They came home all excited and angry. The Walmart people had shown up and they were certain they had convinced them not to come to town. I was quiet for a moment. The memories were hazy and indistinct. I remember even the babysitter seemed animated about it and wanted to be at the meeting, but her parents thought she was so young too. So she was waiting for a call from her parents. What happened? Gina asked. I don't really know. They just stopped. I always thought some legal trickery happened, I said. What were the names of their lawyers? George asked. It took a few minutes of searching through the archives. We eventually found an announcement in the newspaper about one of the meetings. It looked like there were several of them, but I could only remember one. There were 3 names listed there. Dave Hansen, Lillian Jacobs, Frank Heinzman. I read off. George and Gina whipped out their phones and started typing away. I kept searching the database in the library, but there didn't seem to be much more. In fact, there wasn't even a story explaining why they had backed out of the deal. And who was the guy who owned the land? George asked. Dale Crispin, I replied, somehow knowing it off the top of my head. Oh shit, Gina whispered from behind me. You got that right, sis, George replied. What? I asked, getting impatient. I had this feeling we were being watched. I looked up at the ceiling, half expecting to find the little black domes indicating a security camera. There was nothing. I peeked back over my shoulder, and there was no one there either. Still, the feeling would not leave. Look at what happened to Crispin, George said. He had pulled up a story on his phone, not the local paper. There was a story about a vehicle belonging to Dale Crispin that had been found about 10 miles outside of Springfield, Illinois. The man had been thrown from the vehicle and collided with a tree, splitting his head open. There was a photo of the car, and it was horribly mangled, almost beyond recognition. Jesus, I said. But this doesn't prove anything sinister, does it? I mean, people die in car accidents all the time. Yeah, but do people all involved in the same thing here in Hanley disappear without a trace one after another? Gina asked. I cocked my head to the side. Okay, don't leave me hanging. David Hansen. He vanished from his Chicago apartment in August of that year, about 2 months after the meeting here. Lily managed to remain visible and stay on the case for 6 months, but then her abandoned car was found at O'Hare Airport and her apartment empty. Never found. Heinzman lasted a year, and it looks like he ran somewhere. They thought he had vanished like the other 2, but then found him living in Oregon. However, not long after, about a year after he showed up here, he disappeared. They found his car empty in a ravine, and that was it. No bodies ever found. Nothing. This has to be a fucking joke, I said. I mean, what the fuck are we saying here? Someone in this town, or the town itself, somehow managed to make these people vanish? They killed off the guy who sold the land to them? I mean, what stopped Walmart from coming back? They both shrugged. I don't know, George said. Maybe it just wasn't worth the effort. Maybe with the legal team gone, they decided it best to let it rest and go away. There is some very crazy shit going on around here, Gina said. I mean, what the fuck is this? How many other things have gone on like this around here? I held up my hands. What are we saying? What do we think happened out in the building last night? Just then, I heard a noise to my left and turned to see a male librarian. He was tall, his face very pale and red around the edges. He looked like something out of a fucking casting call for a zombie movie. What are you doing back here? He asked. 1 person per terminal. We were just leaving, I said, as George opened his mouth to protest. Let's get out of here, guys. Yeah, it stinks around here, Gina said. We need to be out in the sun. Looks like you could use some sun too, buddy. The librarian didn't seem to react one way or another to what she said. He stood there, mouth hanging open just a bit, and watched us as we gathered up our stuff and quickly retreated from the library. We kept our heads down and looked at our feet as we shuffled out of there fast into the bright sunlight. There was a big empty park across the street, in the middle of which was a war monument to the people who died in the wars from Hanley. There was a bench there, set away from the main sidewalk and not really close to anything. Despite this, we darted our eyes around and watched everyone and anyone with suspicion. We also talked in hurried whispers. So what the fuck are we saying here? I asked. Are we saying there's a fucking cult in this town killing people in an old abandoned drive-in? I mean, what the fuck? Who was the woman I heard on the radio then? And what, do the cult members sit there and watch it all happen on the big screen and listen to it over their fucking car radios? George shrugged. I don't know who it was you heard, but think about this place. You've known for a long time this entire town is fucked up, right? You've told me so before. No town is like this anywhere. This is something out of a fucking history book. So what are these cult people worshipping? I asked, incredulous and eyeing an old woman as she walked across the street, carrying a shopping bag from the women's clothing store. Did she just cast a side-eye our way? Was the guy over there sweeping up the sidewalk watching us from under his hat? I don't know, but it has to be people in power, Gina said, her eyes wide and not looking at me. She was scanning the town square too. What do you mean? I asked. We need to bring this to the cops, right? I mean, this has to be stopped. Think about it, Gina continued, finally looking at me. It takes money and time out there to keep the second screen nice and working. The pavement was fresh. Do you think the cops wouldn't see it happening? At the very least, powerful people are out there. Guys who own businesses and make the decisions about this town are out there. They have to be paying off the cops. Maybe the sheriff isn't out there doing the shit we think's going down, but they're in on it because they look the other way. So yeah, we have no fucking clue who's in on this shit, George said. I mean, we're too new. I don't think my parents are, but who knows if yours are? I felt it in my gut. I had always had a fear going back to when I was very tiny. I was always afraid to be away from home for fear when I returned to my house, one of 2 things would happen. Either my parents would just be gone and the house would be empty, or I would find my parents were there but had changed somehow. They would be someone or something else pretending to be my parents. Fuck you, I whispered. There's no way. If that was the case, then so were or are my cousins and aunts and uncles and my grandparents. All of them live here, and we've been here as a family for a long, long time. I mean, fucking decades and shit. What, every one of my family was part of some fucked up cult? George had nothing to say in response. I looked at Gina, hoping for something rational, but she had turned her head back to study the people on the streets. I followed her gaze. It seemed like every person on the sidewalk, from the cafe to the real estate office and back to the grocery store, cast a glance towards us before continuing on to their cars or their homes. I don't know, man, but this place was not very welcoming to us, George said. At least not at first. Then they all became very welcoming and nice to us. What the fuck was that? Were they going to indoctrinate us into this thing? Or sacrifice us? Gina said in a haunted tone. Guys, I haven't slept since yesterday, I said, suddenly feeling very, very tired. We still need to try and figure out what is happening here, and right now we are jumping at shadows. Literally jumping at shadows if you consider what happened at the drive-in. What we have here is a bunch of isolated incidents, when put together, forms a pattern. But it happens a lot. We have to consider all the options. Something bad obviously happened and is happening out at the drive-in. At least we think so, but for all we know, some fucked up horror film fan club meets out there, and all of the shit we saw there was meant to convey horror. It could be fucking cosplay or something. George laughed. Right. I need to get home and get some sleep, I said. This is too much. My head hurts, and I need to work tonight. You're going back to work tonight? After the shit you heard last night? George asked. Yes, that's a good idea, Gina said. You need to listen again. Same time, same place. See if this happens every night. I mean, if it's some kind of club or something, maybe they meet at the same time. We need you to keep going back and listening until you hear it again. If you never do, then all of this was insane paranoia. If you hear it again, though, then we know. Then we can see about trying to get out there some night and see what's happening for ourselves. I didn't like the sound of that, but it was an argument to have another time. Fine. Okay, I'm gonna head home and crash for a few hours. You guys take a look. See if there are any young women missing from anywhere near here. Other towns, something, anything. A woman with kids, as it sounds like she was talking about kids, just disappearing, has to have stirred people up somewhere. They agreed. Fearfully and reluctantly, we parted ways. I drove them home and went home myself. The world felt tilted on its axis the wrong way. The air smelled different, rotten. The sky was darker. I got home and shut out the world, but now my own house felt weird too. I felt chills running up and down my body. The house was quiet, and this usually meant I could get some sleep, but I felt like I was never going to sleep again. I had always thought I would go to college nearby Hanley and then just come back here and get a job with one of the businesses in town. I realized then I had never had aspirations of going to Chicago or St. Louis or even fucking New York goddamn city. Why was that? I was paranoid. Had to be. This had to be all coincidence. There was nothing to this. There was no way there was a cult of the richest people in town doing things to keep things the same. No way. I climbed the stairs and entered my room. This still felt normal. I closed the heavy curtains I had installed when I took the night job. It was now past noon, and I had only a few hours to get some sleep. The room was dark now, in part thanks to the black paint on the walls, but light still snuck in around those curtains. I kicked off my shoes and collapsed into bed. I put my phone on the charger next to the bed and then closed my eyes. I was sure I was not going to sleep at all, but I soon fell into a deep slumber that was either without dreams or dreams I could not remember, for which I was thankful. I awoke hours later to the sound of my phone vibrating like something having a spasm next to my head. I had a moment where I was unsure where I was. I flailed about and thought the darkness around me had somehow come to life and entangled me. Then I realized my blankets had gotten twisted around my legs. I felt my heart pounding, but caught my breath and extricated myself from them. I flicked on the light next to my bed and found my phone. There were text messages waiting for me, and the time told me it was just after 6 in the evening. I unlocked the phone and saw George and Gina had sent me texts. "This might be it," said the one from George. There was a link to a news story from some newspaper out of Bloomington, Illinois. The story was about how police were looking for a woman in her early 30s who had apparently made off with her 2 kids, ages 6 and 11. She and her husband had been in a contentious divorce, and there had been accusations of abuse on both sides. She had a supervised visit scheduled, but somehow the supervisor got distracted, and she got the kids out of the house and bolted with them. They were last seen heading south and east. In short, right towards Hanley. They were probably not using the main interstates, the article suggested, but people were to keep a lookout for them. There was a description of the silver 4-door car she was driving and of the 2 blonde-haired kids she was with. One was named Kelly and the other David. There had been roadblocks and other things, but so far they had not been caught. Please call this number. Then there was a text from Gina to update the story. It was thought the vehicle and the kids had been spotted at a gas station in a town about 20 miles northwest of Hanley. The woman had been wearing a baseball cap worn low on her head and over her eyes. When someone had approached her to see if she needed help, she had nearly freaked out entirely and immediately got into her car and bolted. As the car rode off, the person who had approached her, an elderly man who was also filling up his RV, had spotted 2 blonde-haired kids in the back seat. Christ, I said. I had definitely heard a young woman's voice. I looked at the photo on my phone and now could not separate the voice I heard from the face I was seeing. Pretty, young, smiling at the camera, the bright sun creating a halo effect around her head. The kids were smiling in their photo too. I hadn't heard kids in the audio clip, but she had mentioned this. Jesus, God, had the kids been killed first while she watched? "Hey, son!" I heard my father call from downstairs. I jumped as if I had been caught jacking off or something. What time was it? Yeah, evening. Why was he even home? He usually got home after I headed out to the night shift. "Yeah, Dad?" I called back. "Can you come down here?" he replied. "Your mother and I need to talk to you about something." I felt those chills run down my spine again. This hadn't happened before, ever, not once that I could remember. What had I done? They know. The thought shot through my brain like a jolt of electricity, and I jumped again. It was impossible. None of this was possible, right? My button-down dad and mom involved in some bizarre cult sacrificing a young mom and 2 little kids. It was insane, right? They would be involved in some cult brutally murdering lawyers who worked for one of the biggest and most powerful companies in the world? Yeah, right. My dad was as uncool as they came. He rarely even used a computer. He had no idea what emojis were. He was out of touch and out of time. Like the rest of Hanley, this new and annoying voice reminded me. "Okay, be right down," I called back. "Hurry, please," Dad replied. Again, this was odd. What did I do? Where would I go? Would I jump out the window? It wasn't so far of a drop, but I could easily land on my head or twist an ankle or break my fucking leg. Did I just try to run down the stairs and out the door? The car was in the garage. The keys were on a hook near the door. It sounded like my dad was in the living room, and I'd have to run past him to get to the keys and out the door. I mean, I felt I could take my dad if I had to, but it wasn't a sure thing. Instead, I got out of bed, changed clothes like I was going to go to work, and headed down the stairs. When I was halfway down, I heard more voices. I heard my father speak to someone, and then a deep voice reply back, followed by another deep voice. I froze. What did I do now? Shit. There was nothing else to do. There was nowhere else to go. My heart pounding and chills running from the top of my head down to the tips of my toes, I walked down the rest of the steps. I turned the corner and stopped at the edge of the living room. There was my dad, dressed in a plaid shirt and khakis, his hands on his hips. He pushed his glasses up on his nose, his back to me, as the sheriff and the fucking mayor both looked in my direction. I looked at the front door, and there was the man who owned the grocery store, and beside him the man who owned and operated the hardware store. It looked like there were more people out on the lawn out front. I could see multiple cars out front. "Hey, Dad," I said. My voice sounded weak, and I wished I sounded tougher. I wished I sounded threatening. "Hello, son," my dad said, turning around to face me. He had a very stern expression on his face. "We have a lot to talk about tonight. Things I was not prepared to talk to you about yet, But you and your fucking friends have meddled around, and now we have to speed things up." What are you talking about?" I asked. "Don't play stupid," the sheriff said. "We know what you heard, what you've been looking into. We already have the Spick family, but we need to talk to you, just not here." "Honey," my dad said. I was confused at first, and then realized my mom wasn't there. I heard footsteps move up quickly behind me, and I turned around. Just as I did, I saw my mom come right at me, some kind of little brown bowl in her hand containing a brightly colored yellow substance. I barely had time to register this when she blew on the powder, and a cloud of it shot out of the bowl and enveloped my head entirely. I coughed and wiped at my eyes, which were now burning. I staggered backwards into the living room, sputtering and spitting. It was like a cloud which would not leave me. I felt it claw its way down my throat and into my lungs. I tripped over the living room rug and tumbled backwards. The darkness found me before I hit the floor. I heard noises before I opened my eyes. Things sounding like something from a nightmare. I had hopes maybe that was all it was. Then I opened my eyes and realized I was in a very dark place, and the smell was something I recognized from our trip to the drive-in earlier in the day. There were voices crying, screaming, but muffled. "He's waking up," said a male voice I did not recognize. "Good," said a voice I recognized as my dad's. Son, wake up now. Come on." I felt a hand on my shoulder shaking me, and then multiple hands grabbed me and pushed me into a seated position. When I tried to move, I realized there were plastic zip ties on my wrists, around my ankles, and more around my knees. I felt panic again. Instinctively, I tried to run, but of course I was bound too tight and nearly fell over. It was my father who caught me. I was surprised to see him and what he wore. We were indeed in the room with the chair the three of us had seen earlier. Only this time the room was crowded. My father was in front of me wearing a white robe, but he also wore this elaborate and ridiculous headdress. As I scanned the room, I recognized the sheriff, the mayor, councilmen, businessmen and women, and my own mother. All of them wearing robes with various colors and symbols on them, and all wearing headdresses of all sizes and shapes too. There was a crazy humming in the air, and in my head. "What?" I said. My father had caught my fall, and he held my head up and looked me in the eye. "Son, we have to talk. You have to listen. You've been out for a while. We've had you in here, letting it work its way into your mind. You have to stop fighting it. You have to give in. You're my son and part of this legacy. This is going to become your duty soon, and for the sake of our town, our family, and our way of life, you have to listen." My eyes felt like they were going to fall out of my head. I couldn't breathe. My heart raced so hard I thought it was going to fall out of my own body. In the chair was the remnants of a body. It was just a torso at this point. The clothing was gone. There was blood all over the floor and a pile of intestines on the ground in front of it. Behind the torso was the mayor, and he held a large knife in his hand, with a huge ornate carved wooden handle and a black blade resembling black glass. Obsidian, my mind threw up to my conscious brain. The torso had no arms. The legs were on the floor. At the far end of the room was the shadow, and it moved like a living cloud. Flashes of white, red, orange, blue, purple, yellow, and amber erupted from it like lightning. Tendrils of it extended and contracted. As I watched, one of those tendrils reached out and grabbed the pile of intestines on the floor. The blackness enveloped it, and I heard it drag across the floor, leaving smaller chunks and smears of blood as it went. The tendril retracted back into the large dark shape, and then was gone. It was eating. Whatever was in there was eating. I looked to the left, and the fear shot through my gut again. George was tied up and gagged there, kneeling on the ground. Tears streamed down his face, and he looked at me, pleading, begging for help. Snot ran from his nose, and he shook his head. Next to him was his mother, also bound, Head down, tears fell from her face. Finally, next to the mom, was Gina. Gina was also bound and gagged. But she was different. Tears dried on her face, but her body swayed as if listening to music, her eyes wide. It was like earlier, hypnotized by something. I felt terror, bright and hot, but then it faded. The humming in my head got louder, and I found it soothing. There was music there. I could hear it. I realized I was swaying too, rocking to the rhythm. It was speaking, singing. The shadow was singing to me, telling me things were okay. Everything would be fine. I just had to listen. Just keep listening. Everything could be mine. Anything I wanted. I just needed to make a little sacrifice. You can hear it, can't you? My father asked. You can hear it? That's because of the blood running through your veins. My family has been here for years, hundreds of years. You see, we were drawn here. Long before there were humans, the world was a dark place, and the old gods ruled. They fought, and all was chaos, and ultimately they were put to sleep because they cannot be killed. They were banished to a dark dimension, and then countless other realities were laid over them. They slumber, but there are places where the walls between these realities are thin, thinner than paper. Hanley is one of those places, one of hundreds around the world. Our family has been the guardians of those thin places in many places going back to the time we first crawled out of the ooze. I felt myself sway. I looked down at George and saw the pure terror in his eyes. The thing over there in the chair, being slowly devoured by the shadow thing, was their father, right? And they were next. They were next. They had always been next in some way, shape, or form. They had been allowed to live here because the god wanted them. All of them as a sacrifice. Except, perhaps, for Gina. It seemed to like her. So did I. This is insane, I said, behind a tongue feeling too thick, too unsteady. My mouth felt dry and like sandpaper coated the insides. This isn't right. This is murder. My dad smiled. Open your mind, son. Feel it. I can tell it's working on you. Open your mind. I saw then. I saw sacrifices around the world. Aztecs in garb similar to the ones my father and these men were wearing, tearing out the still beating hearts of men and burning them in fires. I saw druids dancing around Stonehenge with sacrifices tied to stone tables, entrails dangling and offered to old gods hidden in the shadows. Over and over again, throughout history, I saw men like my father, sacrificing, worshiping, and making offerings to old gods who guided humanity through its evolution in history. Behind the scenes, secret societies in a way, but not Masons. Something darker, more sinister, more terrifying. We keep our town the way it is, the way we like it, by offering sacrifice, worship, and devoting to one of the old gods, my father said, and he pointed with his obsidian knife at the shadow. We offer sacrifice periodically, not all the time, and it provides us with prosperity without the interference of the outside world. When the world tries to intrude, it helps us keep it at bay. Like the lawyers, I whispered. My dad nodded. Yes, like those lawyers. Like the big company who threatened the livelihood of our grocer and hardware store, and our way of life. We like things as they are, and we are successful. We are wealthy and rich in a life we have built over the centuries, and it is due to our worship and sacrifice here. I shook my head. I can't do this. We just made a sacrifice, the mayor said. You heard it. The town is here again. Look. I looked to where he was pointing. There was a small TV monitor in the room now, and it showed the drive-in outside. There was a display of myself, 60 feet high, on the screen. Dozens of cars, the entire town. I imagined all of them with their AM radios tuned and listening now. "We're ready to make another sacrifice," the sheriff said. "This family was allowed in here to become a sacrifice." "Did you really think we'd let a bunch of no-good wetbacks in this town for any other reason?" the hardware store manager muttered and sneered. I saw all of them now as they really were. The blinders were gone. I saw them as the monsters they had become, twisted over centuries of time, turned by these elder gods. The town of Hanley, protected by an ancient being, a force, an energy needing to be fed, one thriving off of the fear and worship and loyalty. And I had benefited from him too. When I looked at the TV monitor and saw my own image, I saw I was a monster too. It was in my blood. All of these people, going back to the Druids, and one of my ancestors had been there. I knew it now. The thing in the shadows whispered. "Let me show you how to do it," my father said. He walked to George's mother. She awoke now, her head high and eyes wide. The sheriff, mayor, and others also went. They grabbed her, and she began to kick and scream against the gag. They pulled her along as if she were nothing, as if she weighed nothing, as if her fighting meant nothing. I realized as they walked, they were saying things. Then I could hear the rest of the town, the entire population, in their cars, and yet still audible in this building, saying the same things, over and over again. We protect our town. We make the sacrifice. We secure our future. We keep things safe. We protect our families. We protect our way of life. We make the sacrifice. I couldn't fight it. There was something in my brain, something in there telling me this was my destiny. This was okay. This was meant to be. I began to sway again, as if to music. I pushed aside the sound of George weeping and screaming and trying to say my name around the gag. I couldn't hear the squeals of terror and fear in his mother's voice. Gina still sat there, eyes wide, rocking in the same motion and rhythm I was. They put her in the chair, and then the mayor pulled her arms behind her back. She squealed again, her teeth bared, as if she were trying to bite through the gag. My father was muttering other words in a language so ancient they sounded like grunts and animalistic noises, all consonants and no vowels. Praises to a god with a name as long as an arm who would drive most men insane just upon hearing it. The sheriff grabbed her legs. Her pleading got louder as they turned her to face the shadow. The shadow undulated with what I could feel was excitement and hunger. Tendrils reached out and pulled back like some dark octopus. It was eager. The lights flashed blue and red and orange and all other colors. My father stepped behind her and held up the obsidian knife. He chanted louder, and the chants from the crowd outside got louder too. Their words in English and his in the foreign tongue. The lights from the shadow reflected in the glass-like blade. It was darkness beyond dark, and it fed from the light. With one swift motion, Dad brought it down from behind, deep into her chest. The scream which came from behind the gag was still loud. He twisted it and turned it and opened the chest. Then with one hand, reached inside, his hand vanishing to the wrist and then beyond. A moment later, my father came out with something, his hands dripping with dark gore, and held up the still beating heart. My father screamed his prayer now, and the shadow grew more eager for a moment. He hurled the heart into the shadow, and there was a bright flash of white. The knife returned, this time opening her up from chest to groin, and when my father, the mayor, sheriff, and hardware manager tipped her forward, her guts fell out onto the floor. Tendrils of black reached out and grabbed them, dragging them back into itself, the bright flashes constant, even more like lightning. On it went. Her head was next, sliced off by the sharp knife as if it were bread. Then the limbs. It only took minutes, but time had now lost all meaning. The room seemed even more crowded. Ghosts walked past. Ghosts of magic men, cult leaders, Druids, medicine men, lunatics, and priests who had all been here, been part of this, worshipped this creature, done this very thing over the countless centuries of humanity, were here now, their spirits alive and just as eager as the shadow. I swayed. I stared at Gina. I wanted her. I had never wanted her more. The voice in my head was telling me I could have her. I could have anything I wanted. Anything could be mine if I just relented. You have to do it next. My father, covered in gore, his hands still dripping with blood, said to me, You have to kill George. I can, I whispered, and I felt tears streak down my face. I can't. You have to, son, he replied. You have to accept your destiny, or you're the one who's next, and I'll have to do it. Don't make me kill you. Don't make me sacrifice you at the expense of these outsiders. You can have anything you want, anything at all. We have been told you can have one thing, although it will truly be the first of many blessings. Yes, I could see it. I could see me with a big house near the outskirts of town. I could see myself with a fancy car traveling the world. Whatever I chose to do, it would succeed. The thing in the shadows, the elder god, would direct things and push things for me as long as it was worshipped and fed. And there would always be a woman who would stray from the highway and find herself lost in Hanley. Or teenagers who would hitchhike and get picked up by the wrong person. There would always be something provided, and we would always know, and the sacrifice would be made. This god was hungry. It would keep us safe, provide for all of us, keep Hanley as the land time forgot, but it was hungry, and we had to feed it to reap the benefits. I could travel the world, but I knew I would never really be free. I would always be tied here. I would always come back here, because the sacrifice had to be made. We protect our town. We make the sacrifice. We secure our future. We keep things safe. We protect our families. We protect our way of life. We make the sacrifice. I didn't even realize I was also chanting this until my father pressed the knife into my hands. It felt weird and bulky. The ornately carved handle fit nicely, though, the blade still black despite the blood, as if it were drinking what it caused to flow, as if it were an extension of the shadow, the elder god. Perhaps it was. The lights flashed. I was chanting the words over and over in English, and then suddenly, I was saying things in a language like my father. What do you want? My father asked, a smile on his face. Tell me. Tell him. I want her, I said, and pointed to Gina. My father's smile broadened. I saw the hardware store owner make a face. He didn't like the idea of a spick in this town. I could feel his thoughts. I could feel my father's thoughts. We were all connected. All of Hanley was connected. Even those who were not in town right now, perhaps on vacation or traveling for business, I knew were in private places swaying and chanting too. The god connected us all, no matter where. You shall have her, my father said. I knew it would happen. She would be changed. She was already changed. This was why she swayed with the beat like I did. The god had already found her, picked her, knew I would want her, and accepted her. There would be nightmares, sure, many over the years, as some part of her did remember this nightmare. But her family died in a crash or a fire, she would say. She would say her family had tragically died when she was young. Some part of her would know the truth. But it was okay. It was all okay. The men, including my father, went for George. George's eyes went wide, and he pleaded with me. Snot ran down his nose and over the gag. He was begging, telling me to fight it. But what was there to fight? It was in me. It was in my blood. I could no more fight this than I could tell my white blood cells to turn purple. It was destined. I was part of this. And what was this one sacrifice really? Just one person for an eternity of prosperity and safety for this town? It hardly seemed worth worrying about. They put George in the chair, and someone cut the ties around my arms and legs. Something was placed on my head. It fit perfectly. A robe was wrapped around my shoulders. I was chanting louder and faster as I stepped toward George, who bent his head back and pleaded with me around the gag. He told me no. He told me to fight. He asked for his life. When I raised the knife, he began to scream at an intensity I did not think possible for a human being. He managed to find a new level of loudness as I brought the knife down and into his chest. Only then did he stop. And then, silence.